Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we'll be exploring the 2000 supernatural horror film Final Destination, which is co-written and directed by James Wong. The film revolves around a group of students who avoid death by leaving a doomed plane after one of them had a premonition foreseeing its imminent destruction. While it appeared as though they were now in the clear, this was far from true, as death had been enraged that they had cheated it, and as the story progressed, the entity used the environment surrounding its victims to bring an end to their lives, ultimately rectifying his initial design. The story was initially penned by Jeffrey Reddick as a spec script for The X-Files, as an effort for him to secure a TV agent. However, a friend of his working at New Line Cinema suggested that he should instead flesh the story and characters out more by turning it into a feature film. New Line Cinema then ended up buying Jeffrey's treatment and hired him to write a full draft of the script featuring death as an unseen force. Writing partners James Wong and Glenn Morgan were then approached to refine the story, with Wong eventually being asked to direct the picture. The basic idea that they wanted to explore was that, unlike traditional horror films where we saw the villain, the antagonist in this film is practically invisible, only showing itself through shadows and the effect that it had on inanimate objects. This ended up proving to be quite a challenge, but the filmmakers started coming up with visual and sound cues to denote the entity's presence. Morgan also recounted an experience he had at Vancouver Airport while waiting for a flight, where he heard the John Denver song Rocky Mountain High playing on the loudspeakers. The writer then began thinking about how the musician had recently perished in a plane crash, which sent a shiver down his spine, and this was the reason the song was added to the film to foreshadow death's arrival. The story begins by following a student named Alex Browning as he waited to board a flight with his classmates for their senior trip to Paris. Right before takeoff, the boy has a premonition that shows the plane's explosion mid-air, and as the events from his vision began to occur in real time, he panics and a fight breaks out between him and another student named Carter. While Carter appears to be the class bully, as the film unfolded, we come to realize that his violent behavior was a guise used to mask the fact that he was actually the one that most feared the prospect of death. As a result of the altercation, both Alex and Carter, along with a number of students, are removed from the plane, including Billy, Alex's best friend Todd, Carter's girlfriend Terry, and their teacher Valerie. I think it's also important to note that while the majority of the group were escorted out, another student named Claire actually believed Alex and voluntarily removed herself from the plane. We also later found out that, much like Alex's premonition, she too received a weird feeling prior to the crash.
At that moment on the plane, I felt what you felt. I didn't even know where those emotions were coming from until you started freaking out. I didn't see what you saw. I felt it.
There's no real explanation given to why both Alex and Claire had this ability, but as the film unfolded, we would see them using this to their advantage to try and anticipate the movements of death. While another fight broke out in the foyer between Alex and Carter, the plane took off without them, only to explode right after takeoff, to the surprise of everyone except Alex and Claire. Due to the fact that Alex had caused a scene claiming to have foreknowledge of the plane's explosion, the entire group were interrogated by the FBI. Finding nothing to link Alex to the explosion, the FBI reluctantly released the boy along with the other students, though they still suspected he had been somehow responsible. Over a month after the unfortunate incident, the survivors attend a memorial service for the victims held by their school, where we notice that Alex has now become an outcast. Even his best friend Todd tells him that his parents want him to keep his distance, fearing that Alex may be an unhealthy influence on their son. Because Death had been cheated of his original design, the entity then began claiming the lives of each of the survivors, beginning with Todd that very evening. Just before this had happened, Alex had also had another premonition with signals indicating that Death was now after his best friend. Making its way into his home, Death began making traps designed to kill him, and Todd manages to avoid many of these before slipping on liquid directed by the entity and accidentally choking himself to death. Now, the death of Todd is ultimately deemed a suicide, but due to all the things Alex had seen by that stage, he becomes convinced that there was a darker power at play. Teaming up with Claire, who admitted to having felt the same strange sensation prior to the crash as Alex, the two broke into a funeral home to see Todd's body. While investigating the body, they are met by the local mortician in an outstanding cameo by Tony Todd, who explained that since they had cheated Death's plan, Death was now taking the lives of those who were meant to die on the plane.
Every single move we make, from the mundane to the monumental, the red light that we stop at or run, it's all part of Death's sadistic design, leading to the grave.
The pair then began discussing the information the mortician had given them, and although Claire was skeptical, Alex insisted that they could cheat Death again by using their gifts to stay one step ahead. He also sees the reflection of a phantom bus, which was another signal foreshadowing Death's arrival, but before he could make sense of it, they find the rest of the survivors on the street. Alex attempts to explain what they had discovered and effectively warn the others, but when Carter provokes Alex in an effort to start another confrontation, his girlfriend storms off before being hit by the phantom bus from Alex's premonition. After watching a news report on the cause of the explosion, Alex deduces that the survivors were now dying in the order that they were meant to die on the plane. Realizing that his teacher was next, the boy rushed to her house to ensure her safety. However, after seeing him in her front yard, the scared teacher called the FBI agents who quickly arrived and took him away for questioning. Although Alex was unable to convince the agents of what was really happening, they were forced once again to let him go. Just as it had done with Todd, Death then began creating traps to ensnare Valerie by creating a crack in her mug which spilled alcohol over the floor and computer, starting a chain reaction that would lead to her death. Running back to Valerie's home to warn her about Death's plan, Alex arrived to find his teacher impaled to the ground, and after removing the knife from her body, he ran out just as the house exploded. Due to the blood-stained shoe prints on the floor and his fingerprints on the knife that killed Valerie, Alex becomes the prime suspect for her murder and is pursued once again by local and federal police. I also thought it was interesting to note that although his own actions led to this was likely a part of Death's design, as it was furious that he had figured out its plan. The remaining survivors reluctantly reunite and discuss what to do while driving through town. During the conversation, Carter learns that he is next on the list, and frustrated over not having control over his life, he stopped his car on the tracks, wanting to die on his own terms. He then changes his mind at the last minute, but his belt is jammed by Death, leading Alex to jump in and pull him out just in time. But as the car was smashed by the oncoming train, the resulting shrapnel flew off and decapitated Billy instead. It's at this point that Alex deduces that because he had intervened, Death skipped Carter and moved on to Billy, which meant that he was now next on Death's list. This leads a teenager to death-proof a remote cabin, where Death taunts him by pretending to want to take his life. It's at that moment that Alex recalls changing seats with two girls in his premonition, which meant that Claire was actually next, leading him to rush over to her house, followed closely by the FBI. Death does its thing once more by creating numerous hazards around her home and forcing her to come out to rescue her dog, who is now in danger of electrocution. Alex arrives just in time and grabs the live cable, allowing her to escape from the car just before it explodes. While we all had thought that since he had intervened with the death of Claire and was now next in line to die, Alex actually ended up surviving the explosion, leading them to all assume that they had now successfully cheated Death. 6 months later, Alex, Claire and Carter traveled to Paris to celebrate their survival, and while discussing their ordeal, Alex realized that Death had never skipped him. Hearing a French cover of the now ominous John Denver song, Alex began to see more omens indicating that he was next. As he left the table to think things through, Claire got a premonition of a phantom bus, much like the one Alex had seen prior to Terry's death. She then called out to Alex, which saved him from being hit by a bus that narrowly avoided him and crashed into a neon sign. Carter then pushed Alex out of the way of the oncoming sign at the last second, and his intervention led Death to skip Alex. But unfortunately for the unlikely hero, this meant that he was now next, and we saw the sign swing back towards him prior to the film's abrupt ending. What this essentially meant was that Death could not be avoided, and though both Claire and Alex had developed the ability to see its design, they could only postpone their own demise. This concept was followed through in the sequel, with one of the new sets of survivors explaining that Alex had eventually died, which was pretty unsatisfying considering all that he had gone through with Claire in the original film. And although Claire's character was integral to the plot of the second film, she also had the same fate.
You know what to do. When I do this, it'll skip you and it'll all be over, okay? It's the only way we can see Death again. You know what to do, alright? I'll always be with you.
In the alternate cut of the film, the relationship between Alex and Claire is explored further, and Claire eventually falls pregnant with this child. The film also featured Alex's death, while Claire and Carter survived only to realize that Death would eventually take us all.
Very nice. Cool, that's great.
Alright, here we go. Terry, you good?
Let's just let that smoke settle a second. Alright.
Filming for the picture took place on Long Island for the plane scene before moving to Vancouver Island for the background shots, and the rest of the picture was shot across Toronto and San Francisco. According to the cast, the shoot was slightly problematic as many of them had other projects being made during this time, with schedules reportedly having been moved repeatedly to ensure the scenes were shot correctly. Having an antagonist that is not actually seen proved to be a difficult undertaking, and the filmmakers began creating an intriguing visual signature to help personify Death. To create a feeling of uneasiness whenever death arrived, production designer John Willett arranged the items in each of his sets as well as the color choices to be unnatural, stating, "I didn't do anything that called attention to itself, but wanted to ensure the audience still felt unsettled by the sudden changes that appeared whenever death was near." Every time that we were watching death at work, the filmmakers also used angled shots and close-ups to highlight exactly how the entity was influencing the environment, which was highly effective at creating suspense. And even though we could see what death was intending, a lot of the death still came as a surprise. Though the film was put together quite well from a technical point of view, the writing feels like a teen TV drama, and as a result, none of the characters were really that believable. With the exception of the Mortician, whose scene reinforced the severity of the situation the characters were in. Even with its limitations, Final Destination is still one of the most creative portrayals of the Grim Reaper that we've seen, and I highly recommend that you guys check out the rest of the series if you haven't done so already. Well, that's all for today, folks. Big thanks to all of you guys who requested we take a look at Final Destination. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Nihat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
Coffee. Starts with a C and ends with an E. So does the word choke. So what, we're gonna choke to death? I want to hear you. We'll go nuts if you start with the shits.
I saw Death's plan. Then we cheated it. But what if it was our time? What if we were not meant to get off that plane? What if it still is our time?